Welcome to the Ortho Joke Podcast, a joint production of the Journal of Bone and Joint Surgery and Ortho Evidence. Join hosts Mohit Bhandari and Marc Swankowski as they discuss current topics and publications in the world of orthopedics and beyond.
Hey, good morning, Mo.
Morning, Mark. How are you?
I'm good. I take it you're at home because I see Ravi Shankar behind you.
Well, I know I'm actually at McMaster University, and I'm sitting in the office
So
space.
Ravi, he lives in your office, not in your home.
Yeah, he lives in the office. Yeah.
Look at that. I learned something today.
Yeah, there you go. Right.
That's one of your really best watercolors, I think, Mo.
Oh, thank you.
I'll give you that comment.
No, I appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, I'm in Albuquerque at the AOA meeting.
Oh, excellent. Hopefully it's an excellent meeting.
Yeah, well, the AOA, founded 1887, the oldest orthopedic association in the world, founded the journal, as you know,
Yeah.
140 some years ago. But the issue is that I'm away from home and struggled to find a coffee. So here's where I came up with. I went to the Little Bear coffee shop down.
Very nice.
And it's interesting how these little independent coffee shops, the flavor is really different than at Tim Hortons or
the other chain,
Dunkin' or which is very uniform, But very interesting kind of smoky kind of latte flavor. But anyway, I'm here, and as I do every time a journal issue comes out, had a look at the most recent one, and found a article that was published by the Metric Consortium. And just for the audience to know, perhaps a conflict of interest, I chair the Data Safety Monitoring Board for the Metric Consortium, and have done so for, I guess, near a decade. And I'd like to just talk about this particular publication, secondary analysis of the primary data collected 8-10 years ago by the Metric Consortium, which I think the audience is pretty well familiar with the fact that this is a group funded by the Department of Defense that has published over 20 really, really well done randomized controlled trials surrounding issues with injury and recovery for the benefit of the armed forces as well as the general public. And this particular study was one of the early ones. It's the Fix-It trial, which is a trial which looked at severe open tibia fractures treated with modern ring external fixation versus treatment with nails and or plates. And the patients were followed for long periods of time. And this was a pain analysis, a secondary analysis done. So the two groups, as stated, were modern ring fixation, N of 122, versus the internal fixation group, 132. Primary outcomes were pain intensity and interference at 6 and 12 months, measured by the brief pain inventory. Secondary outcomes were numeric pain rating scale and incidence of moderate to severe pain. And they compared pain in patients with and without pin site infections and with and without external fixation removed. And so the conclusions of this secondary analysis was at 6 months, the patients treated with modern ring fixators had greater pain interference than patients treated with internal fixation, partly because of pin site infections. And there was no difference in pain interference or intensity seen at 12 months. And at 12 months, if the patient still had the fixator in place, the patients had greater pain intensity, which makes good clinical sense, than those in which it had been removed. But this was not the case at 6 months. And a third of all the patients had moderate to severe pain at both time points, highlighting that persistent pain is common regardless of treatment type. And they conclude that these findings can guide surgeons in choosing ring external fixation or internal fixation for these fractures. And this is information that was, I think, previously pointed out in the LEAP trial, which was a long-term study of severe lower extremity open tibia fractures, that patients have pain after they're done with treatment kind of regardless of how they're treated, and that social support, personality, income, education, all those have major impact on the primary outcomes. But the reason why I wanted to chat with you about this, Mo, in this episode of Ortho Joe, is the whole issue of secondary analyses. So you have planned and conducted numerous large randomized trials in various aspects of care of the injured patient. And you start out with a primary analysis, which is the major outcome, but almost always there are these secondary questions or secondary analyses. And so I want you to educate our audience on what are the best practices when you're planning a trial in regards to these secondary questions.
Sure.
Take it away, Mo.
Okay, so I mean, I'll speak and just chime in because you've been involved in many of these trials. But in principle, so there's the pragmatic, and then there's pragmatic approaches too, right? Which is you're doing a study, you have your primary outcome, you know what you want, and you think, well, I don't really know all of the different secondary questions I may get because, we're just evolving. That's fine. I mean, people can, and that's the way a lot of people do it. They'll do a trial, they'll have their primary outcome, they'll analyze their outcome, and then they'll go back and then, evaluate a series of questions. There are some real challenges with that approach. And I think because of that approach, there have been fairly standard guidelines around how we should be thinking about large programs. This is a very large program. And similarly, we've done some programs like that. The first thing would be is to the extent that you can think deeply about your protocol and your primary and secondary questions. So usually, right, most studies will have a primary. They might have two or three really important secondary questions. They might even have a couple of tertiary. But think about those, and I think that spending more time on those, Mark, is very helpful. Thinking about, okay, and I think you've been a big proponent of this. If you know the questions in advance, then you collect the data you need and you don't waste data. So, there's the approach of let's collect a bunch of stuff. We don't know, we'll probably need it. Probably not a good approach. The better approach would be to say we have hypothesis-driven data collection based on, primary and secondary planned analyses. A way for us to check that, and a way that it's reinforced is prior reporting. So either you publish your protocol prior, and that gives those who look at your subsequent outputs a way to go back to the original and say, well, did they originally plan all this stuff, or did they kind of post hoc make decisions and kind of do a bunch of post hoc analyses, which in and of themselves can be done with some rigor. So we can speak to that. But in principle, that's one check. Clinicaltrials.gov for a trial is a good place to start as well. You outline all the things you've done. And those are important for a host of reasons because we want to make sure that we haven't just cherry picked things and we haven't decided, what makes sense and what messages we want to put out based on what looks most favorable versus what we actually planned. So that would be the first thing. Maybe I'll stop there for a second to see if you have anything else you want to add to that before going to the next level.
Yeah, so you brought up the concept of trial registration, and we at the Journal, along with others that we've collaborated with, BJJ and CORE and Journal of Orthopedic Research, we require trial registration before the first patient is enrolled. And that is to avoid the issue of authors doing statistical fishing expeditions and altering the outcomes, etc. And it's a pretty worldwide accepted standard with human subjects oversight that when you're going to do a randomized trial, you need to register the trial, you need to state what your primary and secondary outcomes are and how those data will be collected and analyzed. And that's to prevent just looking for statistical findings that you can make a point about, which is not really an ethical way to proceed. So that's just one real aspect of it. But suppose let me just pose this question to you. Maybe
Sure.
you can speak to what you did with the float Well, go ahead.
Right,
You're
right.
going to make a point.
Yeah, and I just will add one more point before we jump to the next phase of
Yeah.
this. But is another really important reason to think about the outcomes you're going to be measuring and the interactions or the interventions you're going to be comparing up front is you got to make sure you actually have enough statistical study power for that. So,
Yeah.
for example, if your primary outcome requires, let's say, 100 patients per arm, but you have a number of secondary outcomes that might be proportional, infection, maybe something that might require several hundred per arm. By not thinking through each one separately, you are putting yourself at risk for being grossly underpowered for your analyses, which adds yet another level of, challenge and problem. So the more you think about all the questions that you want to ask up front and document it and put it and plan your research around that so you're appropriately defending why those measures matter, and more importantly, why you'll have enough study power, sample size to manage them all is very important. We did exactly that when we did our first sprint trial. We did exactly that when we did the health, faith, and also the flow trial. But you were going to talk about flow, but that
Yeah, no,
basically
I was just going to ask you how you pre-planned and managed the secondary analysis for the flow trial. Just what was your experience with that trial?
Yeah,
And
so
yeah.
obviously we had put together, a series, we had a prior protocol, we had a trial registration, but there are situations in which, you'll organize a committee, there'll be a writing committee, there'll be an appropriate plan, there'll be appropriate submissions. There's many centers. In this case, there were many centers and many hundreds of investigators around the world who are interested in asking questions after the completion of the primary findings of the trial. So we have a secondary, it's almost like a publications committee, Mark, that's organized with the chair and a process. So one thing is develop a clear process. Number two, um, ideally you want to, before you actually unblind yourself to all the results, um, is to do, in many ways, start thinking about any sort of quote, post hoc analyses before you've looked at the data. So in other words, start thinking about questions that you may want to ask rather than saying, well, we've done our analysis now, and now we're going to start dredging for more and more things. It's okay if you didn't think about it 10 years ago when you started the trial, but before you finished the trial and before you've actually locked the database and actually analyzed, start thinking then, okay, have we learned anything from our database that we may want to additionally ask that we didn't put in, and update your trial register, update things, but be very clear that it's not after unlocking the database and looking at all the data. Now you're starting to say, okay, what works, what doesn't. All this happens before you've even looked at the data, and you're getting the committee together again to say, okay, the trial's closing out. What are some additional questions? Let's create small protocols for each, make sure they're powered, and then we can make assessments. But there needs to be a clear process and a clear transparency of reporting around how that process is. So when you're talking about publishing that, it should be very clear to the readers that what the processes were to make those decisions about some of these measures, especially if they weren't initially included in your original trial registration.
Excellent. So let me just summarize once more for the audience, because this is why I really wanted to talk about this. So ideally, when you register the trial, you would have all secondary analysis outlined, secondary questions and analysis outlined. And if new insights happen that prevent you from having been comprehensive in doing that, before you unblind and unlock the data set, you should work with your collaborators and decide what are the questions, make sure you're adequately powered before you unlock the database. Those are the two best practices with dealing with secondary analyses. I think I have it right.
Yeah, I mean, in principle, right? It's just a matter of proving to those around and to yourself, right, that we're not just doing a bunch of analyses and seeing what sticks and saying, okay, that one sticks, so therefore let's just go ahead and write that paper up.
Yeah.
Versus, this is important. Here's why we want to do it. Here are the total number of patients we have, and here's what we anticipate being the difference. And they made a very clear point in this paper. They did an a priori power analysis. They determined they need 119 patients per arm. So you'd say, okay, well, how many patients do we actually have? Oh, we have more than that. Okay, so this is a reasonable one for us to think about under the assumption of, when we do the analysis. But it's not like we'll run a bunch of analyses. Oh, pain looks like it's interesting. Let's write a paper about it.
Yeah.
Very different.
Yeah. Excellent. And maybe we could conclude with kind of strategies for dissemination. So let's say you've got a trial and there's 10 or 12 different secondary analyses of various questions. Kind of the two options I would see would be to publish them in a group, and I'll let you speak to how the journal wants to
Sure.
do that or not, versus sending them out one at a time to various different journals. What have you done with the trials that you've overseen, and
Yeah,
what are the options and what do you recommend?
sure. Well, the first thing is that one of the greatest value propositions to large trial collaboratives are that there's an opportunity for those who invest a lot of their time across, whether you're recruiting patients, whether the coordinators are helping, all the work that goes into it on top of designing and organizing it. There's opportunity that there's going to be lots of opportunity to be involved in the scholarship that's associated. And so there's the primary paper, which is always, a big, exciting period of time. But then there's all these other questions that come up usually, or that have come up in the beginning. So what do you do? Well, I mean, obviously you want to get them disseminated and presented everywhere as widely as you can. But if you want to have great impact, and we see it happening time and time again, it's great to say this is the body of knowledge outside of the primary paper that from what and the learning we've had. And so putting it together as a compendium, as a supplement makes a lot of sense, and negotiating that up front, actually in your budgeting, because these things often aren't inexpensive, they have cost. Trial groups will often say, if we're thinking of doing this, because we've planned the fact that we might have several secondary papers, let's put some budget in for publication costs. And we've done that in the past as well. So there's lots of ways that you can do that. Any host of large trial groups have probably considered this and have done that. The Parity group, that was a very large trial in tumors, in musculoskeletal tumors, was a similar thing where there was a supplement that was done. Marc, that this would have been under your tenure, I believe. And it was good because it gives everybody a chance to look at the overall findings, and the risk here is minimized of coming up with, as you would say, different, papers that are kind of contradicting each other. When you're putting together a supplement, investigators just naturally think of the storyline, and they're very cognizant of making sure the papers all add something new to the overall message, rather than if you just put them everywhere out there, you can have situations, and we've seen that in the past, right, where there's so many papers that people lose sight of the overall message of the study.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is a bit of a shameless promotion on our part for the journal, but the journal is very interested in working with collaboratives to work out how this can be done in a compendium to be generally done as open access, and I'll just say it, we're open for business.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think the key thing is with any orthopedic journal and in any large group, you're looking to say, where can I get maximal impact, right, Marc? And you're saying, and doing a large study allows you to have impact in multiple countries all at once, or multiple centers all at once, which is great because you want to disseminate it. But you do want to find a partner. I agree with you, that will help disseminate it beyond your own abilities to do so. And obviously, shamelessly, I do agree that the journal has a lot of sources. I would say multiple channels in which we can promote and do as such. And the question is, deciding and working with authors of large trial groups. And I'll using trials, but it could be observational studies, just large groups that have a program of research that is of interest. Working with them early rather than late would be really good for us, because then we can really help organize these things in a way that makes sense for them and for us.
Yeah, great way to end it. Thanks for entertaining me on my desire to delve into a little bit deeper on secondary analysis. I appreciate it, and I'm gonna finish this great coffee from Little Bear and head off to the meeting. So,
oh, look at you! Excellent. Enjoy the rest of your day. This is amazing.
Yeah. Have a great day.
You too.
Cheers.
Yeah.